Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Brumleve, and I'm happy to welcome in Stephanie Cannon. She is the SVP over at Pitney Bowes, in charge of operations excellence and collaborative innovation for global e-commerce. So Stephanie, welcome into the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, for folks who typically work in logistics or supply chain, it's one of those industries that you kind of just like fall into. But you actually have history with the industry going back to your college days. Can you kind of give us a background of how you fell in love with logistics?
Yeah, so I started as an industrial engineer in college. And while I was in college, I did co-ops. You had to do co-ops during the summer with different companies. And I had interviewed with UPS, one of the biggest logistics companies out there. And I landed my first co-op job with them. And so every summer I would truck down to the location that I was going to work for them. I'd stay there for the summer and they would put me into, an interesting, new, different area of the company in order to really learn sort of all the different pieces of their company. And then when I graduated, they offered me a full-time job and put me into their management trainee program, which what they consider, from a professional perspective is really rotating people around into every facet of their company, everything from transportation to their hub operations, which we would call warehousing, clear through their last mile, the brown trucks, and really give you every experience from, the industrial engineering perspective of it, because that was what my degree was in, clear through the operational parts of it. And you really got to learn sort of every aspect, and also really highly focused on leadership development within that program as well, in order to have, future leaders for UPS.
And so when you're doing all of these different roles, was there a particular role that you really took to, that you really enjoyed, that you almost were like, I wish I could go back to that role next summer?
I think one of the most fun roles I did, it was doing time studies on the package car drivers. So what you would do is every day you got into Browns, you would sit as a person sitting in the jump seat of the package car, and you had this little handheld, and it had every little task that they did, and you would go through and you would follow them all through their job all day long, and you would record the time it took for them to do a certain task. What was really fun about that job is not only did you get to learn a lot about the drivers and what they did on a daily basis, you also got to learn a lot about the methods and the processes of those jobs. And, one of the coolest things I actually think is every time we delivered a package, we got to interact with the people that we delivered it. So really learning how that customer service came from UPS to the consumer. And I can't remember which one it was, but I remember when we were at Chagrin Falls, we got to deliver like one of the Bone Thugs and Harmony's guy's house. And I remember being like, am I going to see him? Do I get his autograph? It was just his wife that showed up and we handed it. It wasn't as exciting as I thought it was going to be.
Probably built it up in your head a lot.
Yeah. It was a very interesting part, but you learned so much about people, customer service, your actual degree, and how you utilize that, but also how to improve the processes within that.
That's super interesting because I am a process junkie. So I definitely had like a couple of like process optimization questions for later on in the show. But I'm curious, before we get to that part, how did you go from UPS to Pitney Bowes?
Yeah. So after being at UPS for a while, I got an opportunity to go into consulting. At the time, the consultant company is very big now, West Monroe Partners. At the time when I first joined, they had this little sector they were starting up called workforce optimization. Some of my other colleagues that had worked at UPS had went there. They were really enjoying sort of the other side of it. So instead of working for a company, they were actually going out and being subject matter experts across the US and Europe. And what was intriguing as a young person and professional was I got to travel, I got to see the world, and I got to also learn every single different business, right? Everything from grocery to, 3PL, and transportation. It wasn't just, brown boxes. It was all these different things. And you got to manage your own projects. So you got that client interaction, which was something that wasn't always typical within just a logistics, industrial engineering role.
And so
And
when
then,
you,
yeah,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say with having that kind of global exposure and early on in your career, how different, I guess, are the logistics operations with other countries compared to the US?
You know what, the labor laws are very different there. You know what, actually, I'll tell you, this is a really interesting story. So we were doing work for food industry. Well, here in the US, they deliver food to the restaurants. And when they deliver food, they deliver big cases of stuff, and they deliver cases. But we did over in Ireland, we did a company that had been bought by one of these companies. And what they really didn't understand was the difference in how that country restaurants really ran. So we went from picking cases to where you realized over in Ireland, these restaurants have little refrigerators. And so they get food more often. So deliveries not once a week, but they get deliveries like 3 or 4 times a week. And instead of buying a big case of tomatoes, they bought like 2 tomatoes. And it was interesting because the company who had purchased them and we went over to go do the same work, it was really a challenge to understand the different cultures brought different ways that business was done.
That's super interesting. And so I imagine, how did you get from that role where it's, you traveling the world, learning about all these different, cultures and different operations. How did you go from there to Pitney Bowes?
So after about 3 years, having a family and stuff, it was really hard traveling Europe and every single week back and forth. So it was time to get back into the corporate world. So I went to go work for Nugistics, and Nugistics was owned by a private equity. And they had started on what you would call a smart label, returns label, and then they started doing the returns, but they were really based upon, using the postal service as their last mile. And through that, within being there in a few years, Pitney Bowes, as they were building out their global e-commerce sector of their business, past the Centec and the Presort, they were building their global e-commerce, which was really the way that they thought about how are we going to be around another 100 years. They had really great technology, shipping API technology from the other part of the business. And so part of their overall strategy to grow that business was the acquisition of Nugistics, and which then created, it was sort of like that last major acquisition, and created what we now call global e-commerce for Pitney Bowes. And there was other companies involved, that they had acquired as well. But that began the journey of us really looking and how are we going to build out an end-to-end digital and physical e-commerce company, and utilizing the physical and some of the digital footprint that Nugistics already had, and how we expanded on that to build out what we have now.
And so with your role, it's a SVP of or SVP in charge of operations excellence and collaborative innovation. What does that role? It sounds like a lot. What does that role entail?
So I would say I have one of the coolest jobs. So really, I guess high level, what my role is really supposed to do is create a standardized, repeatable, scalable operating platform for global GEC for long-term profitability and growth, right? And so that's done through multiple different avenues. So I have 4 different divisions that roll into that. I have the Automation and Systems Innovation Group, which has built every single facility we have in GEC ground up or retrofitted with brownfield or greenfield, high speed and emerging technologies, automation. So we use our collaborative innovation, which I can talk about a little bit later, to fill in some of those pieces, and actually has become a pretty big thing in the market that we really love. So we build all the facilities, and then there's all these other practices that go around that. So it was the industrial engineering and the collaborative innovation group. So they're in the facilities. They're really helping with day-to-day processes, continuous improvement, really helping glue the pieces together from an operational perspective. The collaborative innovation group is looking at emerging technologies and how we can use those to differentiate Pitney Bowes, or to get rid of monotonous jobs, but also fill in areas where automation is very capital intensive. So being able to look at ways that you can use robots as a service to still drive the unit economics you need, but it's not capital intensive. And then the third group is the workforce optimization. So the people are our largest asset. So being able to understand how you plan labor and how you use labor management systems to manage that labor, and how you use performance management to make sure you're really getting people to follow methods around the automation and in the processes and in the warehouses. So that's the other group. And then the last group is the operations excellence group. So that really glues everything together. That says, okay, we have training and quality assurance and making sure that our SOPs are standardized, making sure that the way that we, when new technology gets rolled out, that everybody's being trained and understands how to use that technology the same ways. And that's really where it's creating that rinsable and repeatable model that we can scale across the entire network. That drives every facility to operate the same way, to think about things the same way, and to really be able to scale flawlessly. And then, just working on a lot of strategy as well, on how to continue to look at how we grow the business.
And I think you're talking about all of these things, and I had honestly, I thought I had an idea of like what Pitney Bowes does, as far as like postage machines. That was my extent. Like 10 years ago when I worked at a 3PL, I distinctly remember the day that I no longer had to hand stamp envelopes, and I could put it into a machine and it would just spit them all out, and I could throw them right in the mail bin. But I mean, obviously, Pitney Bowes isn't a huge company. So for folks who may not be familiar of just, I guess the vastness and the areas that are covered by Pitney Bowes, can you kind of give us like that high level of like, who is a good e-commerce customer for Pitney Bowes? Is it, some of smaller Etsy shops, or is it some of the larger operations of the Walmarts and the Targets of the world? Where does, I guess, what is Pitney? Like, what is it? I guess what is Pitney Bowes? Is for the lamest question that I could probably ask.
I think it's good to talk about Pitney Bowes, all of it. So then we'll talk about global GEC, which global logistics, which a lot of people don't actually know as much about, right? They think about the mailing meter industry. So you have the SendTech business, which traditionally would have been the mailing meter industry. Throughout the years, they have innovated incredibly and really transformed that company into what they've created recently is a parcel shipping cube. So it's actually bringing, just like they brought the postage meters to these home businesses, they're now bringing the way that you can ship parcels and stuff, and those systems and how to ship parcels out of there. Then you have the pre-sort business, which is pre-sorts 18 billion pieces of mail for the post office.
Wow.
Every year. And then they induct that later into the Postal Services network, and that's a work share program. And then you have global logistics, which is what we are, is we are a parcel shipping company. So origin volume from retailers come into our facilities, or Asian Pacific, those come into our facilities, and we sort those, and we sort them to different destinations or to different facilities. And we enter those, and then what we do is we deliver to what you would call a DDU, but really is a post office. And then the post office delivers our last mile. So we're truly a parcel shipping company on the global logistics side, really using a consultative and digital / way of creating value for our customers versus just, traditional parcel shipping.
And so it sounds like your skill set from UPS is just perfect for the role over at Pitney Bowes. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, it's a safe assumption, but to be clear, Pitney Bowes is very unique in the way that they operate, the way that they create design service delivery services, and the consultative approach is something that what I would say is no other company actually does the way that we do, and that really is our differentiator.
Can you break that down for us on how you guys approach that deliverability?
Design delivery. So like every time we are out selling business, we are designing a parcel shipping solution for that customer specifically. It's not like, hey, you just come on our platform and you get this, and this, and that's all you get, and here it is. We actually go in, we learn about that customer's business. We really try to understand what their needs are. In the global logistics side of the business too, we have 3 different divisions. So we have our domestic shipping business, right, which is all domestic, inner US. We have our Canadian cross-border logistics business. So we have We have intra logistics shipping with inside Canada. We also have across the borders back and forth. We also do, cross-border shipping into other countries. And then we also have fulfillment as well, which is the pick, pack, and ship. So what we're able to do is go in and really truly understand the needs of that retailer or that customer, marketplace customer, and put together a solution for them that's really going to be a true end-to-end e-commerce solution for them.
And with a lot of, we've talked a lot, so far about like automation and, optimization and things like that. But with so many, I guess, complexities and also variables for each of these e-commerce operations, how do you define what that automation structure or optimization structure looks like when there's so many variables involved?
Yeah. So we have a pretty detailed design process in the way that we do it. The way that we thought about phase one was we had, 20 facilities we needed to build out. And we needed to build those out rapidly. We like our parcel profile, right? It's what fits into the postal service, right? Because it's going to go there for the last mile. But, we have everything from little parcels to big parcels, boxes, poly bags, lightweight, parcel select. So the way that we really thought about our automation was really creating a strategy that could handle all those different aspects of the parcel and building a cohesive sort of end-to-end solution. And we did that, what I said, through the traditional automation, but looking at so we ended up using collaborative innovation programs. So that's where we went out, looked at emerging technologies. What we did is we said, okay, places where we don't have enough volume to do all the traditional automation, those high-speed cross-belt sorters or, tilt trays or Euro sorts that were in our very large facilities, how could we use companies like Ambi Robotics that could, in our places where we needed to be able to grow the automation as the volume grew, and it also had a solution that could work just as fast as those high-speed automations. And it also allowed us to pay for the systems as we need them versus having to put out a big capital outlay. And so we built what I would say is a cookie cutter design for a tier one facility, which is very high volume origin destinations and then very high outbound destinations to end consumers. And then our tier twos is either they have a lot of destination volume to the end consumers or they have a lot of origin volume. Tier ones have a very cookie cutter shape. Tier twos have cookie cutter. That way we were able to build those very rinse and repeatable and get those built over 3 years. And what I'll tell you though is we built them to be incredibly flexible. Robotics allowed us to build flexibility into it because, for instance, if we have parcel sizes that get larger, we can swap out a sack versus a Gaylord with very minimal impact to cost to be able to do that. Or we sign 2 or 3 year deals with them. We're able to then swap out, a new technology for that. Like if you put in traditional automation, it's sort of there forever.
I love that you're referring to it as like traditional automation because I mean, with so many logistics companies that I talk to, even just mentioning the word automation, they kind of get like, I don't know what steps to do. It's kind of like, paralysis by analysis, I think is that phrase. So how do you make it collaborative? How do you get people on board who might not be, really efficient or they might not even know where to start when it comes to optimization? So what does that process look like to get them to buy into it and then be collaborative about it and then also continuously improve on that process?
So I'm going to answer this in 2 different ways because there's actually 2 different ways we think about this. Getting our teams and our company to be able to understand it. It's really because overdoing the analysis and data doesn't work, right? It's really about looking at all the different technologies and how those fit together and how those actually, solve each task in the warehouse and then how you interconnect those tasks together. It's different in a tier one versus a tier two. What I will say though, from a collaborative innovation perspective, what we did is we went out and we said, hey, listen, we have a task to solve. And we went out and found partners that were really willing to work with us to solve an actual real world problem that we had in our warehouses and actually be able to design, a solution that was going to work for us. But as they designed that solution, we had everybody involved from our hourly employees, clear through our operators, clear through our executives, clear through our, directors in our facilities running them, and really keeping that open communication base, because they were able to give us feedback immediately on what we needed to fix during pilot phases, what worked and what didn't. Also, like, some of the best suggestions come from the people working on the warehouse, like, because they're actually the ones using that technology every single day. And the way that we were able to get adoption on that technology too is when you brought that in advance and you started to really, really focus on them and how that solution was going to interact with them, but also solve the problem that you needed to get to the unit economics and scale. Their adoption of that technology was quick. And then we created what you would call robot operator jobs, right? And we gave them certifications and we helped them get training. That was what I would consider is a career value proposition that we have here at Pitney. And what we found that did is not only did it get them engaged in the automation to ensure that it worked, and they were constantly optimizing it for you while our engineers are optimizing it, while our operators are optimizing it. But the buy-in, your technology is only as good as the people using it. And so the biggest thing I think companies miss in the automation journey is not involving everybody from the get-go. Because it's everybody's technology. And quite frankly, when we all walk away after we build it, the people that own it are the people using it on the floors.
And I think that you hit the nail on the head, because so many different operations will not go to the employees that are in the trenches, that are making these day-to-day decisions, and they're the ones going to be impacted. It's typically, from what I've seen, it's an executive or like a vice president or something like that sees a shiny new piece of software and just immediately buys it and gives it to the team and tells them to, figure it out. But from your experience, it really goes the long way in order to make everybody a part of the process and part of that. Just, it almost feels like it's part of the job to continuously be optimizing. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah. And we still, even though we've had a lot of these robotics in our facilities forever, we have, it's crazy. We have robotics, we have autonomous forklifts. We're just now rolling out autonomous vehicles, believe it or not, that are doing our middle mile to the post office. What you learn is even in that, like the employees, we still, no matter how long we had it rolled out, we constantly do meetings weekly, or we have our industrial engineers on the floor asking questions: what's working, what's not, what is, and they're constantly giving us feedback, and we're constantly fixing or improving those. We're working with our vendors to constantly fix the technology or improve the technology. It may be that this barcode doesn't scan well, so they're looking at how they use their vision technology to improve scanning rates, and how it may place into a SAC so that you don't have as many exceptions. It's really actually an incredible journey. The more you can collaborate with everybody, the better success that you have.
And then as so there, you had mentioned a couple different investments that Pitney has made, Ambi Robotics being one of them, Plus One Solutions being another one. Why these investments? Is it, really getting that on the boots, on boots on the ground feedback, and that's why you choose to make the investments? Or what do you hope that these investments will bring to Pitney?
These investments are bringing true ROIs and scale and speed to our facility. So it's driving the unit economics that we need. It's also it's helping with reducing, these monotonous jobs. Like if you think about it, sorting to a SAC or picking and placing every day, like Plus One Robotics does induction. Somebody picking and placing and facing every single day is the most monotonous. Horrible job, right? Like
soul crushing.
So we are, and it's the same thing with sorting to a SAC. Like the parcels are heavy. So the way that we think about it is we're actually solving and creating better jobs. We're driving unit economics within the warehouses. It also creates flexibility as our profiles change. There's a lot that happens with that. The other thing I said too, it's preservation of cash. We're able to use robots as a service. It preserves our capital and allows us to pay monthly for these services. And it solves the same thing. So we have found that those are really some of the big reasons we're investing in these, not just to have cool stuff in our warehouse. It actually has nothing to do with having cool stuff in our warehouses. Gaddick, the reason we're doing Gaddick is we want to be able to scale that middle mile. You know, we go to all these post offices every day and we have routes, and, you know, there's major driver shortages. But the other thing too is we want to create like repeatable and reliable and consistent routes day in and day out so we can service our customers.
And it sounds like with a lot of the approaches that Pitney is making, especially on the robotic side and helping with those monotonous tasks, is that it also has that, I guess, side effect of it creates more buy-in from the employees instead of seeing robots as almost like the enemy, that they're going to be taking my job, instead of it reframes it almost to be an assistant to you.
Yeah. Well, and they really are. They're collaborative, right? They are assistants. They're helping the job to be easier for them because there's still people working with the robots. It's just making it easier for them. And what you'll find out, and I say this a lot probably, and you guys have heard it, but you know, we have them, they take selfies with the robots and they name them. And they're truly engaged, and it's like they're robots.
Yeah, I totally get that because I have a Roomba and his name is Robbie and he has a gender. And so I just refer to him as he. And yeah, he does really great work cleaning around the house. So yeah, that's interesting that humans will name the robots and sort of see, you know, an affection towards them. Now you had mentioned earlier about how, you know, deliveries were different for different countries, but is implementing robotics different for different countries as well?
I think what you'll find in Europe, what I see in Europe is there's not a very, Europe's small, right? Like the countries are small, the warehousing space, they just don't have warehousing space. They don't have million-square-foot warehouses like we have in the US. So what's different there is they need robotics because they need the scalability, they need the flexibility, they need to be able to build vertically, they need to get as much throughput as they can out of their warehouses, and they really don't have the space. So putting in big conveyance everywhere doesn't really work.
So what about, I guess, sort of to play devil's advocate here. So there's, I mean, obviously you can't walk out your door without hearing something about AI or ChatGPT. You know, I could kind of lump in, you know, automation and robotics into that as well, because there's also the side of it that's very much like fear mongering when it comes to these different innovations that are coming to a variety of different industries. So how do you, I guess, combat the fear mongering with the plus side of the advantages of these tools?
I think answering the same way we do is it's the communication and engagement on the front end with everybody. Bringing in robots and not communicating or working with people or helping them understand what it's going to do for them. That's what scares, I think, people, is when you bring stuff in and you just say, hey, this is here. I'm not going to really show you how to use it well, and I'm not going to support you, and I'm not going to get your feedback, and I'm not going to certify you to use it. I'm not going to create robot operator jobs. Like, they're looking at these going, I'm confused, right? It's just like we would be confused about anything, right? That somebody didn't tell us in advance. It's like when you come home and your husband told your kids they could go do something and you didn't know. And you're like, wait, I'm confused. It's the same thing with that. Like it's about the communication. It's about how you deliver the messages to them. And that, because what you'll learn is they're not taking jobs. They're actually producing more jobs, but they're producing more upskilled jobs and better quality of life jobs.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, because nobody wants to. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, that the monotony of a certain kind of pick and pack job, or having to walk around a warehouse for miles every single day, lifting heavy objects, like that all plays a role in the quality and the health and just overall quality of life, I think, for a lot of your workers. So if you can take care of them and you can help them have a better quality of life, they're probably going to have, a better output. And when it comes to their work and the longevity of how long they're actually going to stay in that job, I think is where, a lot of companies, they have a lot of issues retaining talent as well. So I imagine that Pitney doesn't have a lot of those same problems.
Yeah, the more we roll out technology and automation, the more that we're seeing the engagement with our employees and the excitement, to be honest. Like there's a ton of excitement when this stuff comes into the warehouses.
And so when you're thinking about, last couple questions, you're thinking about, sort of innovation and where, how far Pitney has come from, and then all of the cool things that they're implementing today. But what are those cool things coming down the pipeline? What in the coming months, maybe in the,
Yeah.
in the next year? What does that look like?
Yeah. So this is the thing. So we spent 3 years automating our warehouses, right? If I think about our second largest spend at Pitney Bowes, other than postal costs, is transportation costs, right? So if you think about what we're going to be spending our time on is, warehouses, pennies, you're solving for pennies, transportation, you're solving for dimes.
Hmm.
So we will be spending a significant amount of our time and our energy from an innovation perspective on how we look at technologies in the transportation industry, how we bring those technologies on, looking at how we optimize our transportation network, and then technologies around everything transportation, because that really is, the big thing.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that every retailer is probably looking at their bottom line and seeing the rising costs in transportation and wondering who can do something about this. So it sounds like, Pitney is they've solved one really big problem, and hopefully, that next problem is optimizing the transportation side of things. All right, Stephanie, was there anything else that you think that should be talked about in this conversation, but I haven't asked already?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there is one interesting thing to say. I don't know if you guys saw Pitney Bowes shipping index that came out, which is just, I think it's interesting to just understand the market setting a little bit.
Sure.
If you saw from last year, like parcel volumes decreased 2%. But if you look at the overall from the 2019 projections of the parcel shipping index, we're 1 billion parcels ahead of that. And we're a year ahead. So even though people look at it and they're like, oh, parcels are declining, the world's declining, like things are declining, I think what you see is we are still a year and 1 billion parcels ahead of what we thought we were going to be in 2019, which I think shows that this industry is not slowing. There's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of great things that are going to happen with technology, and a lot that's going to come in the future.
Yeah, it definitely, I echoed that because I had somebody send me an article yesterday that talked about, sort of the drop in China to US exports. And it's like, well, hold on, like, it's not necessarily a drop because it's compared to last year. You have to really, like, the last, I guess, 3 years since 2020, the data is just thrown everything off and perspective off. So we're kind of coming back down to a little bit of reality in 2023, but still comparative to 2019, we are still light years ahead, where especially in the e-commerce area. So Stephanie, great insight. I love hearing the perspective, especially from, a company like Pitney and everything that you're doing over there, and, collaboration and innovation and automation. Where can folks, follow more of your work, follow Pitney Bowes, all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Pitney Bowes. You can go to their Pitney Bowes website, and you will find all the links and all the press releases and sort of everything that we're doing. You can follow Pitney Bowes on LinkedIn as well. We're constantly posting about all the new innovation and the new technology that's out there.
That's amazing. Well, thank you again, Stephanie. This has been a great conversation. I'll be sure to link to all of those spots in the show notes just to make it easy for folks, because they're not just mailing machines anymore, and they haven't been for quite some time. And I think that's probably, for a lot of transportation folks, that's their experience with maybe Pitney, just only in the office itself. But then outside, anybody who's working in a warehouse obviously has probably heard of you guys and the massive things that you're doing within the space. So thank you again for coming on the show.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. Thank you.